Mr. Chairman, this has been obviously my first process, my first time through a Supreme Court nomination process. I fought for years to be on this committee. It's the one I wanted to be on as soon as I got to the United States Senate in 2013. I made you aware of that, sir, and the ranking member. And it has been an incredible experience, a lifetime dream to be a part of this committee. And sir, I have a lot of respect for you. Some people have even on my side of the aisle have even criticized me for the affection with which I have for you, sir. You have been a partner. And there's something about the four most senior members of this committee, you all, Senator Hatch, yourself, Senator Grassley, Senator Leahy, Senator Feinstein. In many ways, you all have been anchors in this entire institution to a time where the comedy was deeper and greater, and have resisted in many ways that I find admirable the drift towards tribalism within our country and within this vaunted institution. When a Supreme Court vacancy happened, I was one of those individuals that did not wait long before I announced my intentions to vote against Judge Kavanaugh. And sir, I did it for sincerely and deeply held beliefs. I did it because I felt that this was a person that had made it clear in that entire list of people prepared by the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation that this was a guy that spoke directly towards a view of presidential power, presidential immunities, that in this perilous time where a president is a subject of a criminal investigation, that he was going to protect that president, and said as much. Make sure that the president was above the law and accountability. And sir, I've learned a lot. I'm one of the guys that on this side of the aisle, when my colleagues speak on the other side of the aisle, I listen. I try to give them my full attention. And I don't always agree, but I've learned a lot from my colleagues. And my friendships on the other side of the aisle, my sincere friendships. There's been times during these hearings I've texted back and forth with people on the other side of the aisle. I respect them. And I've fought hard during this process. I've given it everything I've got. I've learned that, heck, going back to being a football player, that between the whistles, you fight as hard as you can for what you believe. And if you want to call that partisanship, fine. I've been exuberant in my beliefs, and I've learned a lot through this process. Some of my comments have been referenced numerous times, and I know that I have not been as precise and have allowed my comments to be mischaracterized, and I don't blame those people who've mischaracterized some of my comments. I take responsibility and have learned to be more precise. And I talk to these issues and I talk to my values as much as I can. I travel around this country calling for more comedy, calling for us respecting, seeing the dignity of Republicans and Democrats and recognizing as much as I can. And I say it, patriotism is love of country, and you cannot love your country unless you love all your countrymen and women. The goodness and the decency of Republicans and Democrats in this country is self-evident. And we demonize each other in ways that I will be and continue to be an exemplar of trying to get our dialogue to rise to something different, to be a country that sees that we need each other, that there's no Democratic or Republican way to success, there's only an American way. And sir, you know, and I hope, and I've said this to you personally, and I think I've said enough publicly, that in the hardness with which I fight, I mean you no personal insult, but I did say before, and I say now, before Dr. Ford's charges came up, I say very sincerely that I think that the way this process was run was a sham. I used that word, sir. And it was because we were evaluating someone for the highest court in the land with seeing such a small part of his relevant work product. I didn't understand how so much of his writing, approximately 90% of his relevant work product, was not even being seen by this committee and controlled by a process that was so broken, so partisan. And then, sir, I violated the rules that you put forward in this committee, willfully and knowingly and accepting the consequences of that. And I did so because the documents that were being withheld from the public, I felt the public had a right to know, and they weren't classified. There was no national security issues. And gosh, we disagreed on that, sir, and I locked horns with people across the aisle. And even after all that, I was grateful for the comedy. The gentleman I knocked horns with most said to me, you know what? I was taught to hate the sin, but love the sinner. I really love being on this committee. I love it. From living in Newark, New Jersey, this is where I wanted to be, sir. I wanted to be on a committee that dealt with issues of justice in this country, because I feel that when we swear an oath to liberty and justice for all, I don't think we're there yet as a country. And I have to say now, as I'm sitting here, that I deeply resent this idea that somehow, when Dr. Ford came forward, that this dealt with partisanship. This is shifted this debate in this committee and in this country from raw partisanship to something much deeper. I have such respect for the ranking member. And I was in the room when we discussed, literally hours after I was made aware that the letter existed, about what her motivations were. It was a private room, and forgive me for speaking out of turn if the ranking member believes I am, but her entire sense of decency and honor had nothing to do with politics. Politics was not mentioned. Her entire concerns were about the dignity and the humanity and the respect for Dr. Ford. The conversation we had was about the best way to handle the information that was just presented to all of us. I've now been in numerous caucus meetings where politics has not been discussed, where what has been done was some of the most eloquent speeches I've heard in our caucus meetings from my colleagues about issues of sexual assault, issues of rape. I've heard colleagues read letters that had been written not by a Democrat or Republicans, but by Americans who are concerned about this issue. This is not a partisan moment for our country. Back in the early 1990s, I was a student during the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas, during those hearings. And I think there's people on both sides of the aisle that agree that that was dealt with wrong, that the process then did not merit the dignity and decency of the folks involved or of the issue of sexual harassment. But yet that involved multiple hearings. That involved multiple witnesses. That involved the FBI investigation. And yet we still criticize that process. But now we're here today, and we have fallen even far short of what I believed was an inadequate process. Sir, this is not about partisanship. And a lot of folks are trying to make this about whether she was flying to California or not, whether the letter was authorized or released or not, whether the process served her or not. That seems to be stripping away the heroism of Ms. Ford, of Dr. Ford, to come before this committee willingly, even under circumstances that she said herself were not her wishes.